There is nothing I would not do for those who are really my friends. I have no notion of loving people by halves. It is not my nature. My affections and wishes are unchanged, but one must learn to endure what is and find happiness in the smallest pleasures. A walk, a letter, a warm fire. These are the things that make one's heart steady. I am Jane Austen, and those are my words. I wrote them long ago, but tonight they belong to you as much as they ever did to me, because the struggle to remain yourself in a world determined to change you is not bound to the Hampshire countryside of the 19th century. The costumes have changed. The play has not. This will be my story, but in truth, it will be yours as well. We will laugh together, and we will cry together. We will wander through moments of triumph and disappointment, sip tea over secrets, and share the quiet confessions that only the night can hold. And if you stay until the very end, I will place in your hands the 4 keys I have carried all my life, the same ones that allowed me to walk through the world with my head high, my heart intact, and my edges unsmoothed. You see, the world is full of people eager to wrap their expectations like fine gifts and press them into your hands. Wear this, think this, love this, want this. Sometimes they offer it with the soft smile of a friend, other times with the firm insistence of an authority. Either way, the message is the same: become someone else. I learned early that the quickest way to disappear entirely is to accept every such gift without unwrapping it. Inside, you may find a life that does not fit you at all, a bonnet that pinches, a marriage you never wanted, a career chosen because it photographs well. Ah, agreeable, that most dangerous of compliments. I must confess, I do not want people to be very agreeable, as it spares me the trouble of liking them greatly. Agreeable people agree with everyone, and in doing so, they stand for nothing. They are mirrors in a dim ballroom, reflecting whatever stands before them, but offering no light of their own. If you wish to stay true, you must not become a mirror. Be a lantern instead, steady, warm, and impossible to ignore. I tried to be such a lantern. At 12 years old, my method was simple: write outrageous parodies of the novels in fashion, mocking the fainting heroines and pompous gentlemen who filled their pages. It was my way of saying, I see your world, and I have no intention of living inside it. But the world, dear listener, is persistent. It set about improving me. That was the polite word. In reality, it meant sanding off my edges. The world dislikes edges on a woman. Edges catch the light. Edges make people trip. By my late 20s, the pressure had acquired a name and an income, a marriage proposal. On paper, it was perfect: wealth, respectability, and family approval. I accepted, for one night. By morning, I knew it was a mistake, and so I broke it off, choosing the uncertainty of myself over the security of someone else's vision of me. Before you call me courageous, know this was not without fear. I knew exactly what I was giving up: comfort, stability, perhaps even the polite nod of society. But I also knew this: every yes that is untrue to yourself becomes a slow, daily no to your own soul. And those no's pile up like dust until one day you cannot breathe without coughing. So here is my first promise to you. I will tell you my life, but you will find pieces of your own in it. You will learn to recognize the moment when a yes will begin to erase you, and you will learn how to stop it. Not just in grand, dramatic gestures, but in the quiet, daily moments where the world tests you most. For me, this began in a small parlor in Chawton, at a desk by the window, my sister Cassandra nearby, the kettle murmuring. Outside, the world demanded I be agreeable. Inside, the page asked only that I be myself. It was there I began publishing, quietly, anonymously, by a lady. Some say anonymity diminished my triumphs. I say it preserved them. Fame is a most intrusive houseguest. It rearranges your furniture and insists it looks better that way. By now, you may have noticed that staying true often means refusing invitations, marriage proposals, fashionable trends, obligations that drain more than they give. To practice this art, you must master two skills: the ability to say no, thank you, with a smile, and the ability to brew tea strong enough to console you afterwards. And speaking of tea, if you are still here and not off marrying the next Mr. Darcy you meet, you might consider liking and subscribing. Even ladies in bonnets appreciate a little validation. Now, let me take you back to where it all began, to Steventon, Hampshire, and the first key to staying true, the quiet art of seeing the world before it sees you. For before you can resist the world's script, you must learn to read it. And my own reading began in the corner of a crowded parlor, where a shy girl in a white dress discovered that watching could be far more powerful than speaking. Steventon, Hampshire, my childhood home, a place of green hedgerows, muddy lanes, and neighbors who knew your business before you had the decency to commit it. Our rectory was rarely quiet, siblings rushing in and out, guests arriving with muddy boots and grand opinions. The scent of ink, candle wax, and damp wool weaving itself into every room. In that noisy, charming chaos, I discovered my most valuable skill, the art of watching. You see, children are invisible until they are inconvenient, and I took full advantage of this fact. I would sit quietly in the corner of the parlor while my elders spoke of marriages, fortunes, or the scandal of Mrs. So-and-so's bonnet being entirely too French. From this unremarkable position, I learned the first rule of staying true. Know the world before it knows you. The parlor at Steventon was my theater. The crackle of the fire, the ticking of the clock, the clink of porcelain cups. It was all part of the stage. The actors, neighbors performing their roles with admirable consistency. Mrs. L., who always began any conversation by lamenting her rheumatism before subtly reminding us of her daughter's fine complexion. Mr. B., who could not mention the weather without making it sound like an accusation. And my personal favorite, a certain gentleman whose wit was so dry it might have been mistaken for a drought. Alas, he was not aware he was attempting humor. One must, I discovered, learn to read a room as carefully as one reads a letter. Who holds the most power? Who speaks only to be heard? Who listens without speaking? And who, above all, changes their opinions the moment a richer person enters the room? These are the small maps that guide you through society, without losing yourself in its traffic. It was then I began to understand a truth I still hold dear. Think only of the past as its remembrance gives you pleasure. Let the rest dissolve. Why give space in your mind to things that drain your spirit when you could fill it with scenes that strengthen it? This is as much self-defense as it is sentiment. Observation became my secret armor. While others spoke, I collected small treasures, turns of phrase, glances exchanged, the sudden stiffness of a spine when a sensitive subject was mentioned. These were my pressed flowers, stored not in books, but in memory. And later, many of them bloomed again in my novels, wearing different names, but the same expressions. You may be wondering, Jane, how does watching help you stay yourself? Well, it tells you the script before the play begins. When you know who will compliment your dress only to mock it later, or which gentleman will discuss the weather, as though it were a philosophical treatise, you can choose your lines, or decide not to appear on stage at all. It also spares you from the most exhausting kind of change, the change you make to fit into rooms that don't deserve you. Once you understand the actors, the plot, and the stage, you are free to decide whether the play is worth joining, or whether your evening would be better spent by the fire with a book and a pot of tea. Of course, there were dangers in being too good an observer. My brothers accused me of storing their most embarrassing remarks for later use in my novels, a charge to which I plead guilty, and entirely without remorse. Why let a perfectly good piece of human absurdity go to waste? The world is generous with its foolishness. I simply take notes. Observation also taught me restraint. The temptation to correct every foolish remark is strong, but sometimes the wiser move is to sip your tea, note the foolishness for later, and save your words for when they will have the greatest effect. Tea, I have found, is an excellent aid to patience. A well-brewed cup can outlast the most tiresome conversation. Steventon taught me another lesson. People reveal themselves in patterns. The neighbor who always speaks well of absent friends will likely speak well of you when you are not present. The one who is generous with praise but stingy with warmth will probably sell you for a shilling if the opportunity arises. And the gentleman who says, "I never repeat gossip," is the one you should never tell anything to, because he will make an exception for you. Now, you may think such social dissection is a quaint hobby from a quieter age, but look around your own life. The parlor is now a group chat. The neighbor is a coworker in a video meeting. The gentleman with the weather is the person who comments on your post without having read it. The actors have changed, but the play is still running. If you wish to stay true, start by learning the script, not to act in it, but to decide whether you want the part at all. And here is the second key to resisting the world's attempts to change you. When you know how the performance works, you are free to step away from it without fear. You do not have to play every role you are offered. Sometimes the wisest answer to an invitation is silence. Sometimes the bravest act is to remain in the corner, smiling slightly, letting others believe you are shy when in fact you are simply editing. In those early years, I learned to value this quiet power. Speaking can reveal you. Watching can protect you. And when the world begins to demand you conform, you will already know which demands are harmless and which are designed to bend you out of shape. If the first lesson was about recognizing the danger of false yeses, then the second gives you your first tool to avoid them: deliberate observation. Not idle staring, but active collecting, like a botanist pressing flowers, except the flowers are small truths about human nature. Keep them, study them, and when the world tries to sell you a story about yourself that doesn't fit, you will know exactly why it feels wrong. Next, I will tell you how this habit of watching led me to my second act of rebellion: writing. Not the polite, proper prose expected of a young lady, but the kind that made fashionable novels look utterly ridiculous. For once you have seen the world clearly, the next question is irresistible. What will you do with what you've seen? It began, as most rebellions do, in secret. I was 12 years old, armed with nothing more dangerous than a quill, a stack of paper, and a perfectly unreasonable sense of my own amusement. The novels most fashionable at the time were brimming with heroines who fainted at the sight of a gentleman's boots, and heroes who declared their love in speeches so long one might need to send for refreshments halfway through. Naturally, I found this hilarious. And rather than merely roll my eyes like a proper young lady, I decided to commit the greater crime. I wrote my own versions. My heroines recovered from fainting in record time, usually to request more cake. My heroes, instead of gallantly rescuing them, were often the cause of their distress, sometimes by treading on their gown, sometimes by saying something irretrievably foolish. I had discovered something important. The pen could be a mirror, but it could also be a magnifying glass, making the ridiculous impossible to ignore. It was my first taste of creative independence, and I knew, even then, that I could not give it up. Of course, I was warned. Young ladies, I was told, were expected to read novels, not write them, and certainly not to make fun of them. But as I would later remind myself, one man's ways may be as good as another's, but we all like our own best. And my own way was to see the absurdity of the world and set it down in ink before it escaped. Those early pages were not written for publication. They were written for the sheer joy of shaping a world where common sense triumphed over social nonsense, where women spoke their minds, and where a heroine's worth was not measured by the height of her curtsy. In my little upstairs room at Steventon, with the faint smell of baking bread drifting up from the kitchen and the muffled clink of teacups from below, I felt more myself than at any dance or dinner. But the habit of writing, truly writing, was dangerous. It sharpened my eye and my wit. It made me notice inconsistencies in the behavior of those around me, which, as you might imagine, is not a talent universally appreciated. There's nothing quite so alarming to the pompous as the possibility of appearing in print. And so began the long-standing suspicion among friends and relatives that anything they said in my presence might end up, with slight alterations, in one of my books. To which I can only say, if you do not wish to be satirized, you should probably avoid behaving in a satirizable manner. Writing became my private training ground for a much larger act of defiance, refusing to adopt the literary voice considered proper for women. The publishing world, and by that I mean the gentleman who ran it, believed a lady's work should be confined to moral tales, light romances, and pleasant, but entirely unthreatening observations. No wit too sharp, no truth too plain, No laughter at the expense of respectable society. I ignored them. My characters had opinions. They made mistakes. They laughed, sometimes at the wrong people, often at the right ones. They valued affection over wealth, self-respect over social advancement. In short, they behaved in ways that the novels of the day told me they should not. It was not that I set out to be radical. I simply could not bring myself to write like everyone else. I had read enough to know that imitation was the quickest way to become invisible. And I wanted my readers, however many or few they might be, to see me clearly, even if they did not know my name. That is another lesson for you. If you wish to stay true in a world that wants to change you, resist the urge to mimic its most popular voices. They may win quick applause, but they fade just as quickly. Your own voice, even if it shocks or confuses, will keep you company for life. And it will attract the right people, the ones who recognize themselves in your words. There is a kind of freedom in writing purely for your own satisfaction. You answer to no editor, no market trend, no well-meaning cousin advising you to make the heroine prettier and the ending happier. You write for the joy of it, and in that joy, you find yourself. Of course, joy alone does not keep the wolf from the door. In time, I would face the reality that words had to earn their keep if they were to justify the hours I spent on them. But even then, I swore I would never alter the heart of a story to please someone else's idea of who I should be. Better to remain unpublished than to publish a false self. Looking back, I realize that my earliest writings were my first public no. No to fainting heroines. No to pompous heroes. No to the idea that a lady's wit must be muffled like a parlor cushion. That no would echo through every book I wrote. And then came the moment when the page was no longer enough. The test would be real, tangible, and far more unsettling than any fictional scene I had composed. A question was placed before me, framed in the most respectable terms, wrapped in the security of comfort and the approval of almost everyone I knew. All it required was a simple yes, which of course was exactly why I had to consider whether to refuse it entirely. In the winter of 1802, the weather was bitter, the days short, and the air thick with the scent of damp wool and well-meaning interference. Into this dreary season came a proposal, not of a literary kind, but of a matrimonial one. The gentleman in question was respectable, amiable enough, and possessed of a fortune that, according to several enthusiastic relatives, would solve every conceivable problem in my life. I liked him well enough. I did not dislike him. And perhaps that was the very danger. We are often told that affection can grow where it does not yet exist, that comfort will sweeten itself into love, that security is worth a little sacrifice of the heart. For a brief moment, one long evening to be precise, I thought perhaps they were right. I said yes. By morning, I knew I had made a mistake. The thought of binding my life to someone for whom I felt nothing stronger than politeness made the walls of the house feel closer, the air heavier, the future smaller. My imagination, usually so busy, grew oddly silent, as if even it could not find a story worth telling from within that arrangement. And so I did the unthinkable. I withdrew my acceptance. It was an act that seemed to shock more people than if I had committed a genuine crime. Turning down a secure marriage, particularly when one had little in the way of fortune, was viewed not as independence, but as recklessness, almost ingratitude. But I knew then, as I know now, it is not time or opportunity that is to determine intimacy. It is disposition alone. Without the meeting of minds, without that spark of understanding that makes conversation come alive, the arrangement would have been nothing but a polite imprisonment. I do not deny that the choice was difficult. Security is tempting. Approval is tempting. A neat, well-arranged life is tempting. But the cost of that neatness, my voice, my wit, my ability to laugh at life's absurdities, was too high. I could not write, truly write, from behind the bars of someone else's expectations. It is here, dear listener, that you might see yourself. Perhaps you too have been offered something that looked perfect on paper, be it a relationship, a job, a role in life, only to feel a quiet dread under the surface. That dread is worth listening to. It may be your truest voice, whispering that the life in question does not belong to you. Rejecting that proposal did not suddenly make my path easier. On the contrary, it made it harder, lonelier at times. But it kept open the space in which my own life, rather than someone else's design, could take shape. And it gave me a fierce kind of courage. The knowledge that I could choose discomfort over dishonesty. That courage would be tested soon enough. Within a few years, I would face the loss of my father, the scattering of my family, and the uncertainty of not knowing where I might live from one year to the next. It was a time of movement, of instability, of writing with no guarantee that my words would ever find a home. And yet, I wrote. I wrote as if each sentence was a roof beam over my head, a wall to keep out the cold. Because when the world becomes uncertain, the act of creating something entirely your own is more than an indulgence. It is survival. I remember the winter when my father died. The air itself seemed brittle, as if one could snap it in two like an old quill. Our house, well, our former house, echoed with the absence of him. The very furniture looked uncomfortable, as though it too wished to be elsewhere. That year, I learned something vital. You can be homeless without ever stepping outside your own door. We left Steventon, my sanctuary, my stage for observing humanity in all its delightful absurdity, and moved from lodging to lodging like traveling actors with a bad script. I had my mother, my sister Cassandra, and a handful of trunks. And my pen. The pen became my hearth, my chair by the fire, my single reliable friend, besides Cassandra, of course, but she does occasionally fall asleep while I am speaking. Life seems but a quick succession of busy nothings. I wrote that once, half in jest, but in those years it was more truth than joke. People think writers need grand adventures to fuel their work. I assure you, constant disruption and the gnawing uncertainty of where you might sleep next are quite enough to make a novel out of the inside of your own head. What surprised me, however, was how the act of writing became my rebellion. Society expected me to recover from grief by making myself agreeable to the next eligible gentleman, preferably one with a suitable income and tolerable manners. But grief, I found, is not soothed by silk gloves or polite conversation. It is soothed by purpose, and for me, Purpose came in the shape of black ink on white paper. Now, I must tell you, writing in a storm, literal or figurative, is not about inspiration striking like lightning. It is about lighting a candle when the windows rattle and telling yourself, I will write one more line before I despair. In my case, it was often one more scene about a ridiculous ball or a pompous cousin, and occasionally a pompous cousin at a ridiculous ball. These were my anchors. In modern terms, you might call it sticking to your routine or creating despite chaos. But let us be honest, most people wait for the right conditions to do what matters to them. My dear, the right conditions are a fairy tale. If you wait for them, you will grow old with your dreams still in their night clothes. I learned to write in cold rooms, in borrowed chairs, with interruptions from neighbors who believed authoress was a synonym for idle lady who would be delighted to mind their children for the afternoon. If you are trying to build something, a business, a book, a better version of yourself, you must learn to work not despite interruptions, but through them. I often found humor in this necessity. For example, I once tried to write a scene of deep romantic tension while an actual cat was dismantling my inkwell with the precision of a naval officer. It is hard to produce a swoon-worthy declaration of love when you are also shouting, Cassandra, the cat, across the room. Yet perhaps that is the secret, not taking your own work so seriously that life's little absurdities become obstacles instead of seasoning. People assume storms are moments to endure until the sun returns. But sometimes the sun is weeks away, and you must learn to live and work in the rain. I suspect this is true for you as well. Whatever your storm is, heartbreak, uncertainty, the suffocating hum of other people's opinions, you must find your pen, your candle, your scene about a pompous cousin. Do not misunderstand me. This is not about pretending the storm is pleasant. It is about refusing to give it the power to silence you. The world will try to change you most aggressively when you are at your most uncertain. And in those moments, it is the daily act of staying true to yourself that becomes your lifeboat. My method was simple. Write every day, even if it was dreadful. Some days I produced dialogue so clumsy it could have tripped over its own hem. Other days, something alive would emerge, a spark of wit, a line of truth. The point was not perfection. The point was persistence. And persistence, my dear, is far more romantic than people think. Perhaps your version is not writing. Perhaps it is learning a skill, building a dream, changing a habit. Whatever it is, I beg you, do not wait for calm seas. The habit of doing the work will make you stronger than any temporary peace ever could. And when you work through the storm, something unexpected happens. The storm becomes part of the story. Looking back, I realize those transient years, with all their discomfort, shaped the very texture of my novels. Without instability, I might never have understood the delicate line between safety and stagnation, or the strange ways people reveal themselves under pressure. In your own life, your storms may yet be your greatest source of material, not for a book perhaps, but for the character you are building. And let me assure you, character matters more than comfort. So I wrote on, in cold rooms, in noisy parlors, in moments when the only applause was the teacup clinking as I set it down. And each page was a refusal a refusal to be defined by loss, by gossip, by the narrow corridors, society built for women. And as the ink dried on yet another scene, I could feel it. I was still myself, perhaps more myself than I had been in Steventon's comfortable days. Which brings me, naturally, to the place where my pen finally found its truest home, a small cottage where I would write the novels that would outlive me. But I will not rush you there yet, for first, you must understand why building a sanctuary is not a luxury, but a necessity. By 1809, after years of drifting like a bonnet caught in a crosswind, we finally dropped anchor, and what an anchor it was. Chawton Cottage, small, sturdy, and not at all fashionable, the sort of place that would never make the society pages, which suited me perfectly. If one is to write the truth about people, one must first live somewhere they are unlikely to visit uninvited. The moment we stepped through its narrow doorway, I knew. This was not merely shelter, it was soil. And I, forgive the rustic image, was ready to plant myself. Ah, there's nothing like staying at home for real comfort. I had said it before, but now I understood it. Chawton was not a grand house with marble floors and endless drawing rooms. It was a safe harbor, a place where the creak of the stairs and the gossip of the kettle became as important to my work as ink and paper. You see, after years of being dislodged, I realized something. Your mind cannot fully bloom if your body is always in motion. Writers, dreamers, builders of any kind, we are like teapots. We function best when we have a steady base and the right conditions to simmer. It is a curious truth that the world will tell you to be adaptable, but too much adapting turns you into someone else entirely. In Chawton, I stopped adapting and started rooting. This was the first step in staying true to myself, creating an environment that encouraged it. Now, do not imagine this was achieved with great expense or a team of decorators. My sanctuary began with a small writing table by a window, a shelf for my favorite books, and a strict household agreement that no one was to just tidy my papers. A woman's desk, much like her mind, must not be rearranged without her consent. If you are alive today, and I assume you are, given you are listening, you may believe you cannot have such a sanctuary without wealth, or at least more time than you currently possess. But here is the good news. A sanctuary is less about size and more about sovereignty. It is the corner of your room where your tools are ready, the cafe table where your thoughts arrive reliably, the hour of the morning before anyone else's demands can intrude. Chawton taught me that the physical and the mental sanctuary feed each other. In the quiet, I could hear my own thoughts before they were drowned out by the expectations of others. This is not merely pleasant. It is essential, because when you can hear yourself, you can answer yourself. Of course, the neighbors did try to interrupt my tranquility. People assume that because you are at home, you are available, as if writing a novel is merely a pleasant hobby one can set aside to discuss the health of someone's aunt. I learned to protect my sanctuary not only by closing the door, but by cultivating the art of polite deflection. One must occasionally say, "What a most curious thing," and then change the subject. In Chawton, my writing flourished. Sense and Sensibility was published. Pride and Prejudice followed, and the ink seemed to flow more freely than ever. Was this simply because I had more time? Number. It was because I had a place that belonged to my work as much as it belonged to me. Every creaking floorboard, every chipped teacup, every view of the garden in changing light became part of my rhythm. You may think this is quaint, but I insist it is practical advice. Choose your surroundings as you would choose your companions. A room can make you as uneasy as a tiresome dinner guest, or as comfortable as a friend who knows when to keep quiet. And let us be perfectly frank. In the modern world, distractions are no longer limited to unexpected visitors or local gossip. You carry them in your pocket. Your sanctuary will not build itself. You must guard it fiercely. That might mean closing the door, turning off the device, or reminding those around you that your time is not an all-you-can-eat buffet. In my day, the interruption might be a neighbor with a pressing question about whether the postman looked pale this morning. Today, it is a glowing rectangle demanding you scroll through everyone else's life instead of building your own. Either way, the principle is the same. Every minute you give away without thought is a brick stolen from your sanctuary. Chawton taught me to think of my time and space as a walled garden. Anyone allowed in must bring something nourishing. Conversation, kindness, perhaps cake. If they bring only weeds, the gate remains closed. And there's another thing about sanctuaries. They do not eliminate storms, but they allow you to withstand them without losing your roots. In Chawton, I faced criticism, rejection, and the usual murmurs about whether a woman ought to write at all. The difference was, I could retreat to my small table, put on the kettle, and remember exactly who I was. I will not say that your mulberry trees are dead, but I am afraid they are not alive. That line, my polite way of telling an inconvenient truth, applies equally well to a life without a sanctuary. If you do not nourish yourself, your ideas, and your sense of self, you may look alive from a distance, but inside, not so much. So I encourage you, if you have not yet found your Chawton, build it where you are. Begin with one object, 1 hour, one ritual that tells your mind, this is where I am most myself. Protect it, expand it. And when others suggest you do otherwise, remember that the world will always prefer you to be available rather than authentic. And once you have your sanctuary, you will notice something else. The courage to face the world increases in direct proportion to the safety you feel at home. That is why I could publish Sense and Sensibility as by a lady, because anonymity did not threaten me. I was already known to the only person whose opinion truly mattered, myself. Now, you may think my story ends here, peacefully sipping tea in my cottage garden, but comfort is not the final act. Even in Chawton, the world still knocked, and sometimes I chose to answer in my own peculiar way, which leads, naturally, to the most curious decision of my career, to give the world my words while keeping my name hidden. It is a truth universally acknowledged that if one's name appears in print, society will immediately begin to speculate whether one is too ambitious, too proud, or, the worst accusation of all, too fond of oneself. When Sense and Sensibility was published in 1811, the world saw not Jane Austen, but the modest phrase, "by a lady." That, my dear listener, was quite intentional. Now, you might imagine I was hiding. In truth, I was doing something far more radical. I was refusing to let the world's opinion determine the worth of my work. Fame can be a splendid bonnet. It catches the eye. But it frays quickly, and sometimes it itches. At that time, a woman who wrote for money was often viewed as little better than an actress who performed in public without a chaperone. The polite word was improper. The impolite word, well, I shall let you imagine it. And while some found thrill in courting scandal, I preferred tea and tranquility. My novels were not written to parade my name before the neighborhood. They were written to explore the truth of human character, something that I assure you requires a quiet mind far more than it does a loud reputation. You see, anonymity allowed me the most precious gift a writer can have: freedom. Without my name on the cover, I could listen at the edges of drawing rooms while people spoke of by a lady as though she were a distant cousin. They critiqued, they praised, they speculated, and I sat, entirely invisible, sipping my tea, my smile giving nothing away. Invisibility, when chosen, is not weakness. It is strategy. I have always been fond of saying, I will not say that your mulberry trees are dead, but I am afraid they are not alive. It is my way of pointing out that truth can be delivered without baring one's throat. Anonymity was my mulberry tree. Apparently absent from the bloom of literary society, but very much alive where it mattered. And here is the lesson for you, dear listener. In a world that constantly demands you brand yourself, declare yourself, and market yourself like a jar of preserves, it is worth asking, what might you accomplish if you step back from the noise? What could you create if you didn't spend every moment announcing you were creating it? Staying true sometimes means declining the invitation to the ball entirely, even if the music is tempting. In our own age, yes, I speak as though I've walked into yours for the evening. You have more opportunities than ever to be seen, yet the pressure to be seen can be the very thing that dilutes your essence. I watch young people flinging open the curtains of their lives on every passing day, each moment curated and captioned for strangers. And I think to myself, my dear, if you keep nothing for yourself, where will your truest self live? There is courage in claiming space, but there is also courage in keeping some rooms locked. The room where you write, the corner where you think, the small hours where you are entirely unperformed. These are not absences. They are your sanctuaries. My anonymity was my locked room, and I decorated it with every character and every sentence that mattered to me. Let us not pretend it was always easy. There were moments when I longed to be acknowledged, to watch someone read my words and realize they were mine. But then I would imagine the chatter, the sidelong glances, the smug suggestions that perhaps I should write something more fashionable or add a moral suitable for young ladies. The thought alone was enough to make me hide my quill in the teapot. Even now, my advice to you is this: not every gift you possess must be presented for public approval. Keep some pearls for your own pocket. Share the rest when you are certain you can do so without losing their luster. The world will try to change you, to smooth your edges, to repaint you in its favorite colors. But if you have kept a quiet corner of yourself untouched, you will always have a compass back to who you are. As for the critics, they had no idea their lady was laughing at them from behind the pages. "For what do we live?" I once wrote, "but to make sport for our neighbors and laugh at them in our turn." And oh, how I laughed. You see, anonymity gave me the sweetest revenge, to let the work stand on its own while I strolled past unnoticed, bonnet tied, lips sealed. And if you take nothing else from this, besides the reminder that tea solves most dilemmas, take this: you do not need to make your name louder to make your voice stronger. The world may think it owns you once it knows you. Sometimes, staying true means letting your creation be known, while you yourself remain delightfully mysterious. Now, finish your tea. In the next part of our journey, I will show you what happened when my quiet little cottage became my fortress, and how that space, guarded from the world's intrusion, allowed me to write the works you now hold dear. And perhaps, just perhaps, you will see how protecting your own fortress might change the course of your life entirely. If you're still with me, let's let the candle burn a little lower and try a small experiment. We will laugh very softly at the world until it tells us its secrets. I promise this is polite laughter. At worst, it will ruffle a few feathers. At best, it will free your spine. People think I write about romance. I do, yes, but only as a means to expose the comic theater where pride bows to pretense and vanity waltzes with self-delusion. Society loves a performance. My preference has always been to adjust the curtains, nudge the scenery, and whisper a line that makes the audience realize the scene is absurd. In my experience, the surest way to keep yourself from being swallowed by the stage is to become its quietest, wittiest stagehand. Humor, to be useful, must travel with good manners. A well-brewed quip, like a well-brewed tea, should be warm at first sip and bracing in the aftertaste. It is my chosen armor because it offends no one who does not deserve it, and it works even in rooms where truth is not invited. Consider the tedious ball, and there are so very many. The music stumbles, the chandeliers glitter, and a certain gentleman, he knows who he is, though I have mercifully mislaid his name, insists upon telling me how fortunate I should feel to be noticed. A direct rebuke would cause a scene. A gentle joke deprives him of his stage, without depriving the room of its peace. One must never underestimate the power of a smile that moves the furniture an inch to the left. There are 3 ways my humor protects me, and you may adopt them at once. First, deflect. When someone offers an insult wrapped in ribbon, tilt it to the light and admire the ribbon. "What exquisite packaging," you say, and place it unopened on the mantel. The gift explodes in its own silence. Second, reframe. When a remark seeks to put you below, lift the entire conversation by an inch. A most curious thing, you observe, how money improves a man's opinions, and suddenly the room studies opinion rather than you. Third, reveal. Show a truth so lightly that the vain believe you've paid them a compliment. They will thank you as they walk straight into their lesson. These arts are the social equivalent of a parasol. Apparently delicate, remarkably effective. I have been accused of cruelty for laughing at my neighbors, but as I once put into Mr. Bennet's mouth, for what do we live but to make sport for our neighbors and laugh at them in our turn? The line is less cynicism than hygiene. In a world that will constantly try to change you, pair you with the proper suitor, press you into the proper opinion, tie you beneath the proper bonnet, laughter is the warm water and soap that keep your hands clean after handling other people's expectations. Besides, I laugh at myself first. I am, by my own admission, too fond of tea to be truly adventurous and prone to preferring the people who live in books to most of those who live in drawing rooms. Self-mockery oils the hinges. It lets you open other doors. Let me show you how this works when the stakes are higher than a dull dance. A friend once advised me, very gravely, that a lady's mind should be like her hymn, kept out of sight. Imagine the kindness of my reply. Then I fear my hymn is already muddy. The room laughed, and the advice withered. Another time, a relation suggested that the safest husband is the richest husband. I agreed so entirely that I asked whether she recommended choosing a bonnet because it matched the curtains. She hesitated, then smiled, and the conversation wandered into safer country. In each case, humor kept my dignity intact while refusing the script I was offered. If I had argued, I should have been labeled severe. If I had submitted, I should have grown smaller. A joke allowed me to remain myself, full-sized and still welcome at tea. You will notice I rarely use sarcasm like a cudgel. Sarcasm wounds the wrong people. It leaves bruises on the kind and only tickles the thick-skinned. Irony is subtler. It is a pin tucked in a ribbon. The vain prick themselves. The thoughtful merely admire the bow. When I sketch a Mr. Collins bowing too low or a Lady Catherine standing too straight, I am not calling for laughter to crush them. I am inviting laughter to resize them to human scale. Once resized, their power to unmake you is gone. That is the deepest service comedy can perform. It returns giants to their proper height and returns you to yours. There is a private benefit too. Humor keeps your own heart from hardening. The world will sometimes offer you injuries. You cannot always stop the blow, but you may choose what becomes of your face afterwards. A sneer carves a line you will come to dislike in the mirror. A joke lifts the corners and leaves them willing to rise again tomorrow. I have endured whispers, wrong guesses, earnest lectures on the duties of a lady, and the merciless counsel of those who have never been lonely a day in their lives. I do not despise them. I set them gently into a scene and let them perform their little dance until the audience, bless them, laughs, and the spell is broken. You may try this today, long after my ink has dried, when your feed fills with instructions, what to desire, who to be, which brand to buy. Answer with a smile and a question that reframes the theater. How curious that everyone selling the cure also sells the disease. Then return to your work. Humor is not an escape from seriousness. It is the air hole that lets seriousness breathe. Without it, you will suffocate in other people's importance. With it, you may sit through the longest ball and still come home yourself. Of course, armor is tested. There were evenings when the room was colder than my wit, when a joke fell with a thud like a badly baked pudding. One adjusts, one pours another cup. The point is not to win every exchange. The point is to preserve your interior. Laughter is a boundary with a bow on it, gracious enough to be admitted everywhere, firm enough to protect what must not be touched. If ever you doubt, recall the ridiculous suitor who believes your no, thank you, means convince me. A single airy line, "Sir, your confidence is admirable. I trust you will enjoy it alone," will spare you an hour and save your spine. And yet, I will not pretend that wit alone can weather all weather. There are nights when the body grows stubborn, when the hand trembles, when the room itself seems to lean. In such seasons, humor becomes not only armor, but medicine. It sweetens the draft, steadies the wrist, keeps the sentence walking even when the legs would rather fold. Which brings me, with a quiet seriousness, to the time when the laughter in my parlor grew softer and the pages grew harder to fill. When I discovered whether a smile and a sentence could keep company with suffering, and whether I could go on writing when my strength would not. There's something about the final chapters of a life, or of a story, that makes the air feel different. The light seems sharper, but also softer. People lower their voices, and somehow, time moves both faster and slower. I could feel it in my bones, quite literally. My body was tired, not in the charming way a heroine faints at a ball, rescued by a concerned gentleman with impeccable timing. Number. This was the deep, persistent kind of tiredness that no cup of tea or polite refusal to dance could cure. By 1817, I knew my health was failing. The doctors called it all sorts of names. I will spare you the confusion of their Latin. Whatever it was, it seemed to drain my strength without draining my mind. And if my body wanted to retreat, my mind refused to follow. It still wandered freely, to drawing rooms full of gossip, to seaside towns where strangers met under unlikely circumstances, to quiet country lanes where love might be just around the corner, or perhaps 2 corners away. At that time, I was working on a new novel, Sanditon. Oh, how I loved it. A fresh cast of characters, half-built houses, an entire town in the making. There was salt in the air, a touch of absurdity in the way people tried to sell a place that wasn't finished yet, and plenty of human comedy to mine. I wrote in bed, my body propped up by pillows, my hand trembling a little more each day. But the sentences, they came as steadily as ever. People told me to rest. They meant well, I'm sure. You've already given the world so much, they said. You should look after yourself now. But I have always believed that looking after oneself means doing what gives you life. And for me, that was writing. You do not abandon a story you love just because it becomes harder to reach the page. You do not let illness dictate the ending. Besides, I had lived my entire life by a simple rule. If there is still something worth saying, you say it. Even if you have to whisper it. Even if your ink smudges. Even if you're the only one who will ever read it. Perhaps you know the line I wrote long before those last months. Know your own happiness. Want for nothing but patience, or give it a more fascinating name. Call it hope. When I first wrote it, I meant it for a character, but as my strength left me, I found it was meant for me too. My own happiness was still here, in the act of creating something beautiful, in shaping a world with nothing more than paper and ink. The rest, I could call patience. Or, more truthfully, I could call it hope. hope that I might finish, hope that even if I didn't, someone, someday, would pick up my pages and understand, hope that the act of trying was, in itself, a kind of victory. I will tell you something you might not expect. There is a strange joy in working at the very edge of your limits. Not the kind of joy that makes you laugh out loud, but the quieter, steadier joy of knowing that you are using everything you have left in service of something that matters to you. It is like walking through the last golden light of the evening. You know darkness is coming, but you keep walking anyway, because the light is too beautiful to waste. In those final months, I noticed the little things more than ever. The sound of the pen scratching across the page, the way a sentence felt right when it landed exactly where it belonged, the smile that escaped me when a character said something clever without my quite planning it. These were not grand victories, but they were mine. If you are listening to me now in your own life, perhaps you know something of this. Perhaps you are facing an ending of a chapter, a job, a relationship, or even a way of being. And perhaps you are tempted to step back, to say, it's too late, or I'm too tired. But I tell you this, the end is where the most beautiful acts of loyalty happen. Loyalty to your craft, to your voice, to your dreams, and yes, to yourself. I won't pretend I finished Sanditon. I didn't. But I took it as far as I could, right up to the line where my hand refused to move. And do you know what? That was enough. Because my story, like yours, was never about perfection. It was about persistence. About staying true to what makes you feel most alive, even when the world, or your own body, tries to change you. Some people think courage looks like riding into battle or making grand speeches. I think it can also look like a woman, sitting at a small desk, wrapped in a shawl, determined to put one more sentence on the page before the day ends. No applause. No audience. Just a quiet, private triumph. I held on because I believed that words matter, that they can outlive us, that they can carry pieces of us into the future. And now, here you are, listening. Proof that I was right. So if you take anything from my final chapter, let it be this. You do not have to finish the story for it to have been worth telling. You simply have to keep telling it for as long as you can. That is staying true. That is hope. And since you are still here, stay with me. In our last cup of tea together, I will give you something I've never written down. My complete method for remaining entirely yourself in a world that will try again and again to make you someone else. We'll trade polite society for plain truths, lace gloves for rolled sleeves, and I'll send you away with a way of living that will make even the most determined matchmaker or critic utterly powerless against you. It will be my strongest blend yet. My dear, it is a truth universally acknowledged that advice is generally unwelcome unless it is disguised as gossip, wrapped in wit, and served with tea. So here you are, seated comfortably, I hope, with your cup in hand. And I will tell you, plainly yet politely, the only method worth considering if you wish to remain entirely yourself in a world determined to improve you against your will. It requires no grand fortune, no title, and certainly no obedience to trends, though a good sense of humor will be indispensable. I call it, without undue modesty, the Austen method. 4 principles, 4 shields, 4 little rebellions, each quite harmless to others, but deeply liberating to oneself. First, observe before you act. This is not cowardice. It is reconnaissance. People will mistake it for shyness, which is to your advantage. For while they are busy underestimating you, you will be busy understanding them. In every gathering, there are 2 plays being performed. The one upon the stage, with its grand speeches, proud entrances, and polished smiles, and the other behind the curtain, where eyes dart, fans tremble, and truths are whispered in corners. I have always preferred the second performance. It is shorter, more honest, and infinitely more amusing. To watch quietly is to arm yourself. You will know who speaks sense, who seeks only to be heard, and who is already imagining the arrangement of the dessert table. But observation is not merely a social sport. It is a discipline. Think only of the past as its remembrance gives you pleasure. Keep what serves you. Discard the rest. If you rush into every scene, you may find yourself cast in a role you did not audition for, with lines you would never have chosen. Once you have observed, and believe me, one can observe a great deal over a single cup of tea, you must learn the second key. Say no to compromises that betray your values. The world adores compromise, particularly when it is your principles being adjusted to fit their convenience. It will praise you for being reasonable while quietly stripping you of what makes you yourself. I once, in a moment of weakness or curiosity, accepted an offer of marriage from a gentleman with a large estate, a fine library, and no sense of humor whatsoever. I had the wisdom, belated but intact, to decline the next morning. Imagine spending a lifetime in the company of a man who would rather rearrange his waistcoats than his thoughts. It is not time or opportunity that is to determine intimacy. It is disposition alone. A union of minds, not merely of chairs at the same breakfast table, is what makes life bearable. This applies to all things, not just matrimony. The friends you keep, the work you do, the opinions you adopt. The moment you find yourself defending a choice that makes you quietly miserable, pour yourself another cup and consider whether you have been far too accommodating. The third key is to create a space that protects you. Not simply a room, though a room will do in a pinch, but a territory, physical, mental, emotional, where your identity is unquestioned. When I settled at Chawton Cottage, it was not grandeur I sought, but privacy. There, I could write without an audience, dress without performance, and think without interruption from neighbors convinced their errands should be mine. Ah, there is nothing like staying at home for real comfort. A sanctuary need not be fashionable to be effective. It can be as modest as a desk by a window where the sunlight falls in the late afternoon, or as elaborate as a library that smells of leather bindings and rebellion. But you must claim it, and you must defend it, for the world will try to fill it with other people's needs. If your sanctuary is only an hour of morning solitude before the household wakes, guard it as jealously as a duchess guards her jewels. And now we come to the fourth key, which is my personal favorite. Use humor to disarm social pressure. This is not to say you should mock openly. Heavens, no, that would only make them defensive and you dull. But rather that you should become so entertaining in your deflections that people forget they meant to direct you at all. When confronted with pompous advice, I find that a smile, a nod, and a remark such as, "One must always consider the possibility that we are all quite wrong," works wonders. They leave feeling clever for agreeing, and you leave without having agreed to anything. Laughter, especially at one's own expense, is the best armor. For what do we live but to make sport for our neighbors and laugh at them in our turn? Do keep the balance, however. Too much laughter at another's expense, and you may become the bore you are trying to avoid. The trick is to let them feel included in the joke without realizing they are part of its inspiration. You may think these 4 keys, observation, refusal, sanctuary, and humor, are too simple to be of real use, but the great mistake is to believe that complexity is the same as depth. Most of life's tangles come from people ignoring what is plain. Watch before you step. Decline what insults your heart. Keep a place where you are untouched. Laugh, especially when it is difficult. These will carry you further than the approval of 100 strangers or the flattery of one particularly persistent bore. My idea of good company is the company of clever, well-informed people who have a great deal of conversation. That is what I call good company. This, I admit, is a high standard, but why on earth should one lower it? Fill your days with such company, even if that company is, on certain afternoons, only yourself and a pot of tea. So there you have it, my dear. Not a recipe for popularity, nor a guide to worldly success, but a method for living without the constant ache of pretending. You will not always be praised for it. Indeed, you may sometimes be thought peculiar, but you will sleep without rehearsing tomorrow's performance, and wake without dreading the script. And if the world insists on trying to change you, simply smile, pour another cup, and let it waste its time. Remaining yourself, after all, is the most courageous thing you can do, and the most delightful. And now, I shall leave you. The kettle is already singing. Farewell, and remember, stand firm and never let your tea grow cold.